2024 presidential election. Never in any of our lifetimes has there been such a close election. 7 states have the consensus ratings of a toss-up. The momentum is with Trump. However, this race is far from over. So, before we get into anything, we'll start with the safe Republican states such as Montana, Wyoming, Indiana, Utah, Kansas, of course, Oklahoma, North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, probably in the likely column for one more cycle. Those white voters have trended so far Republican. All these sort of states, South Carolina as well, Alaska probably safe, maybe bordering on likely, we'll put it unlikely. Nebraska at large, its first district and its third district for the safe Republican column. For the safe Democratic column for Kamala Harris, we have Washington, California, Oregon, Colorado, and for the first time in the safe column, New Mexico, Hawaii, the state of Maryland and Washington, D.C., Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Delaware, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Vermont. They're all going to be safe. I don't think there's much to say about that. So as we head into the more competitive, and Illinois, and so as we head into the more competitive race, and New York, so we start off with Minnesota, which is one of the blue wall states that Kamala Harris is very likely to win. She is the favorite there. She's polling about 7 or 8 points ahead of Trump. Minnesota is a Democratic state. The closest it's been in the last 50 years was when Trump ran against Hillary in 2016. He came very close to winning it, got within a point, but fell just short. And if Trump couldn't win it in 2016, I don't think he's going to be able to do it in 2024. So we head to the state of Texas. Texas is a blue trending state due to a lot of remigration from Mexico and also remigration from the rest of the country. More liberal states where those people are coming from. So that is why Texas is trending blue. Texas is just going to be in the likely column for this cycle. I think there's probably about an 80% chance that Trump takes the 40 electoral college votes there. The Senate race is a little bit more interesting, but that's Texas. Ohio, likely, not much else to say. It's a Republican trending state because of the white, non-college degree voters. Virginia, likely. I'm willing to move it into lean or even toss-up category in the future, but for now, it stays unlikely. Just before we get some of those early votes in. Florida, now a likely Republican state. It's moved from that toss-up category that it was there 4 years ago and for the last 20 years. New Hampshire, another likely state. So the Nebraska second, likely. Maine at large, likely. Maine's first, safe. Maine second, likely Republican. So that leaves us with the 7 states, the 7 swing states, the 7 toss-up states, which is really what this video is about. So, Georgia, that's my first state that I'm going to be predicting for the 7. 70% of the vote is in Atlanta. That's often forgotten. Abortion is not as significant of an issue there as it is in the other 7 swing states. Kemp is on the ground. He's campaigning. His team is campaigning. They won by 7 in the governor's race 2 years ago. And if we take the average of white, black, and Hispanic support in crosstabs of poll over the last month, Donald Trump is going to win Georgia by around 5%, depending on turnout. Now, obviously, I'm not saying he'll win by 5%, but there's so many facts that go for Trump in this state. For example, even with a swing of 3% relative to the nation, it would be 1.4% to the right if trends continue, meaning that Trump, as long as it's within 1.5% of the national popular vote, he wins the state. So if black turnout is depressed by 10%, as early voting has shown it is on trend to be, and Republicans a couple points better, maybe 2 to 5 points better, Donald Trump will really make some gains there, and Kamala will have to improve Warnock and Biden's margin in the Atlanta suburbs by 6 or 7%, which is going to make it very difficult because she has her support amongst college graduated voters, which is most of the Atlanta suburbs, a lot of the Atlanta suburbs, white educated voters. And she's polling way worse than Biden did by about 5% nationwide. Trump is leading the state aggregate by percent, and there's a major emphasis on immigration in the state compared to some of the other ones, and he has a 15% lead on that issue. So if early turnout, is as high as it has been, maybe I'd be willing to move it into the, tilt Democrat category. But now I'm going to put it into the lean Republican category. I think Donald Trump is the favorite in the state. I think even though the Atlanta suburbs are trending Democratic, and it looks like Georgia is going to be pretty firmly Democratic in the near future, this cycle Republicans should have one last victory in Georgia, and Donald Trump will flip that state from 2020, where he lost it by 0.3%, which was a very small margin. Arizona, where Trump leads the state aggregate by 2%, which at this time of last cycle overestimated Joe Biden by 3.5%. Now that's not a prediction that the polls will overestimate again, but it does show that the idea that Republicans are overestimated in polls in Arizona is completely false. Republicans improving with Hispanic voters could swing the state into Trump's voters, even if there's a swing left in Maricopa County white voters, which there isn't necessarily going to be, as we've seen from polls saying that white educated college voters are actually swinging away from Kamala. Lake lost by 0.3 in 2022, and a lot of people use that as an example of why Trump couldn't win the state. But I don't think Carrie Lake is anywhere near the candidate that Donald Trump is. She is not Donald Trump, even though Katie Hobbs was also a horrible candidate, and Carrie Lake should have probably won that race. Uh, she's a radical in Arizona. She attacked John McCain voters. So I don't think that it is a reasonable comparison. There are some things going for Kamala, though. Abortion's on the ballot. The Arizona Republican Party is in shambles. But at the same time, it is the only state where the economy is not the biggest issue, and that issue is immigration. And the approval for the Biden administration, which Kamala's a part of, is at 36%, which is the lowest of any swing state, which is why I'm going to put it into the lean Republican category at the moment. The state of Nevada, the silver state, it's predicted every election right pretty much over the last 100 years, barring a couple. 2.4% swing relative to the nation from 16 to 20. And if it continues, it'll vote 4.5 points to the right of the nation, which means that if Kamala wins the national vote by 4.4, based off of that, she would still lose. There is a Democratic advantage in the ground game there, but there is a Republican governor which has gotten a change in voter laws. Polling overestimates Republicans in Nevada, and they have Harris leading by one. So off of that, it's a very bad sign for Republicans and bad sign for Trump. 3/4 of the state lives in Las Vegas, and there's a 28% Hispanic population. So a lot of those voters, Hispanic voters that we've said could may swing the election in Nevada. But the problem is that a lot of them don't vote as heavily Republican as they do in Arizona or even Florida, for example. Housing is a major issue in Nevada. The housing crisis is huge there, and Kamala Harris has a huge lead of 10% there. And the economy, which is one of Trump's strongest issues, is actually the second least likely state, Nevada, to say that the economy is an issue. John Ralston, who has a perfect record in Nevada, he's predicted every presidential election, every House seat. He's got a crystal ball. Has said his crystal ball is broken. He has no clue which way the election is going to lean. So for me, I'm putting it in the tilt Democratic category. I think it'll be very, very close either way. I think Trump just doesn't have the ground game at the moment. It doesn't have the polling isn't too great. I mean, he's losing at Trafalgar poll in Nevada. Trafalgar is a very Republican biased pollster. So there are some worrying signs. North Carolina, often called a Democratic trending state, it's not. It voted 5.8% of the right of the nation in both 16 and 20. So if trends stay the same, it's going to be very difficult for Kamala to win because she needs to win the national popular vote by over 5%. This idea that Mark Robinson is going to ruin the election for Trump is completely ridiculous. That doesn't work. The idea that the governor race impacts the presidential race, it doesn't exist. It doesn't happen. I think it's a ridiculous argument. Polls were underestimating Trump by 5% at this stage in North Carolina. So again, this idea that Republicans are overestimated in North Carolina is quite silly, I think. So I'm putting it into the lean Republican category. It's the state with the least emphasis on abortion as well, and that might be why Ted Budd won by 5%. So there's further evidence of that in 2022, and it's also the most conservative state on abortion. It's a major issue, but housing is a major issue, but Harris is only leading it by 3 instead of the 10 she's leading by in Nevada, which is really, really important. So that's my Sun Belt prediction. Looking at Wisconsin, a state that went for Biden and Clinton, and for Trump in 2016. Harris leads the aggregate by about 1%. She's in a state where polls are wildly inaccurate. Traditionally, they favour Democrats, but in 2022 we saw that wasn't the case, and Ron Johnson was overestimated, who was the Republican Senate candidate, was overestimated by about 3%, and same in the governor's race. The margin was under 1%, and the Greens are probably going to get about 1%, and they weren't on the ballot in 2020. That's a really significant point because the Greens will take voters from the Democrats. Um, there was not a single poll in 2020 that had Trump within um, winning Wisconsin within 3 months in 2020, and there was only a couple that had him within three, and it was just off winning. So I think that there are some good signs for Harris in Wisconsin potentially, but I do believe that Trump takes out Wisconsin. I put it in the lean Republican category at the moment. Moving on to the state of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is a really tough state to project in any election. It's always been the toughest state, really. It was a toss up in the last two elections. Um, it was very close margin. At the moment, Trump leads the aggregate um, on Real Clear Politics, but is just behind on 538. Um, it's a state where normally Republicans are underestimated in the polls, but we saw in 2022 that wasn't the case. So a lot of these polls are coming in. It's zero point 0.5 the difference. It's very hard to tell. Siena has him down by 4 in Pennsylvania, but up by 5 in Arizona. I think it's starting to look like that Pennsylvania has a bigger focus on abortion than a lot of other states, um, which is really concerning if you're Donald Trump because that's not his issue. Um, that he wants to be, on the defense on, obviously. Um, it's a really tough state to predict because the margins are so close. Currently, I'm going to put it into the lean Kamala Harris category. I think she will um, win the state because Democrats have a better ground game there. Republicans have a lot of ground game, technically, but it's not Republican ground game. It's independent from the party, like Scott Presler or even Charlie Kirk's. Vivek Ramaswamy is doing a lot there. So that's why I think Pennsylvania probably just leans Democratic. But there is also a lot of argument to say that it goes Republican and Trump wins it by a couple points with lack of progress from Kamala with white college voters. She could go backwards from Biden. Non-college voters, which would be a disaster for her. And I think if Pennsylvania goes blue, so will Michigan. I think it's pretty much the same reasons. Abortion is a really big issue. Judy Dixon, who was a radical conservative on abortion, lost by about 13 points to Gretchen Whitmer, who's a radical on abortion for the Democratic Party. So I think that pretty much wraps up my prediction. Donald Trump will win the election as it stands with 272 electoral college votes. He is the favorite on most betting websites. He is the favorite on a few models. 538 has a 50-50 at this stage, with Kamala having the slightest of edges. Nate Silver has Trump with the slightest of edges. It is a complete toss-up of a race. Any of these states, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Nevada, could go the other way. even Georgia. I'm happy to change that in the next 20 days. We will see. Um, I think as it stands, Donald Trump is the favorite though. That is the end of this video. 272 for Donald John Trump, which gets him over the 270 needed to be the next president, which would make it the closest election in American history. Thank you and good.